Hi everyone, welcome to the Writers Book Club podcast. I'm Michelle Barraclough, and each month I take a deep dive with an author into the writing craft and process behind one of their books. Today I'm talking all things writing with Terri Green, whose brand new novel, The King's Jewels, is about to hit the virtual stands. This is the third novel in her fabulous Sisters of the Sword series. That's a lot of S's. Terri and I got together last week at my house, along with a couple of kookaburras, which you'll hear in the background, for a brilliant conversation about writing and self-publishing an historical fiction series. Now, I know many of you are wondering whether or not to go down the indie path, and Terri has some absolute gold to share in this episode about how and when to make that decision and some of the really important things you need to think about before and after hitting publish. And with a doctorate in creative writing, Terri also has so much to share with you in terms of writing craft and process. She's also given me a swag of resources to share with you, so you'll find all of those in the show notes. Let me tell you about Terri Green. She's the author of 3 novels, The Swordmaster's Daughter, An Unsuitable Pursuit, and The King's Jewels, which make up her Sisters of the Sword series. Terri has a PhD in creative writing and has won several prizes for her short stories. She loves to write books full of history, mystery, and romance. Now, we're going to focus on the second book in the series in today's discussion, An Unsuitable Pursuit, and Terri does a few readings from it to illustrate, various aspects of writing craft. So let me tell you what it's about so you've got some context. We're going back to the 17th century, people. Whitefriars, London, 1605. Lucinda Evans, Swordmaster's daughter and reluctant informant, always knew Lord Colin Cavendish would make her pay for the mistakes of her past. Forcing her to spy on the Catholic swordsman at her father's fencing academy is bad enough, but now she must prize information from a charming Spanish diplomat by whatever means necessary. Given Señor de Guerra's reputation, success is a mixed blessing. She's damned if she does and destroyed if she doesn't. To make matters worse, her handler and go-between is none other than Cavendish's heir and nephew, Robert McCrae, the man she loves, who is far beyond her reach. When Lucinda's investigations lead to a web of intrigue and double dealings, she doesn't know what to believe and who to trust. With the help of the Sisters of the Sword, her clandestine band of female fencers, she uncovers a plot so heinous and explosive it will go down in history, putting Lucinda in the perilous position of knowing far too much. Please enjoy my chat with Terri Green. Terri Green, welcome to the Writers Book Club podcast, my friend.
I'm delighted to be here.
Thank you for coming all the way from Avalon to Coleroy for this interview.
Wasn't too much of a stretch.
The sacrifices you make, my friend. So Terri and I are in the same writing group and have been for quite a few years now. So I'm one of the luckiest people because I've gotten to read your Sisters of the Sword series before anyone else. Well, pretty much early reader.
Early draft, yeah.
And I feel very invested in these books, and I just think everybody needs to read them because they are so much fun, so beautifully written. They've got everything that a reader could possibly want for a good read, and there are 3 of them now.
Yes, finally. Trifecta.
I love a series too. When you read a good series, especially the first book, and you keep thinking about those characters, and the joy of discovering that there's a second and a third book is, I don't know, is that a reader's thing?
Yeah, I think that's why with indie publishing, it's series that do really well. It's also, that's how you get return business. But unfortunately, I'm not a particularly fast writer, and because they're quite complex plots too. But I think it is. You get invested in that world. And I think with a lot of crime, when you have a detective too, that's what people really get invested. It's the characters.
Yeah.
And they like stepping back into that world that's a new story, but a familiar cast and setting. Yeah, so it's like going back to an old neighbourhood, I think.
Yeah, and I envy the lucky people who haven't read any of these books yet because they're going to get to read 3 in a row. Lucky sods.
Yeah, well, that's the one drawback with the series is sometimes readers won't read a series until it's complete.
Yeah.
So I have to get writing a bit faster.
They don't want to be left hanging.
I'm thinking about 5 or 6 maybe.
In this series?
Yes.
That's music to my ears.
Yes.
Music to my
ears.
ears.
I think I'll be done then. Yeah. I'll move on from the sword thing.
I'm sure you'll find. Well, I know for a fact you've got something else boiling away, so we won't talk about that yet, but that's for another conversation. Terri, I really want to dive into your writing practice, all your secrets. You have, as you like to call it, a doctorate of making things up, which is a PhD in creative writing. So you are just all over the craft and the process side of things. So I'm really looking forward to picking your brains about that, and for a series, because we really haven't done much of that on the podcast. So I think people who are interested in writing, not just historical fiction, but also people who are interested in writing a series are going to get a lot out of this. So I wanted to start with where the idea for the Sisters of the Sword novels came from.
Well, it's a little bit of a strange genesis because it was the character. It started with the character of Lucinda. And I was lucky enough in 2017 to win a residency, a 3-month residency in the UK, where I was staying in Devon. And it was before I applied for the residency, I had an idea. At the time I was writing young adult contemporary fiction. And I had 2 ideas. I had an idea for a contemporary book and a historical book. And when I presented my pitches to my writing group, which was the precursor of our current group, they all said that one, which was the historical one.
There you go.
So I madly scrambled. I did some research and put together a proposal and put it in. And I won. I got the residency. And what that was about, it was from having a holiday in England and hearing this on the radio, this story about these boys that were kidnapped to perform in the children's theatre during Shakespeare's time. And the theatre was quite successful for a while and rivaled Shakespeare's company. And I just thought that was a fascinating story. So I did the residency, struggled, wrote that novel, and that's where I kind of learnt my chops in writing historical fiction, learnt what not to do.
Very important.
For instance, that I was probably trying to be too much of a slave to the history and the detail rather than the story. And that character was based on an actual character, but fortunately not a lot was known about him, but a lot was known about the plays he was in. And it was look, I really love that novel, but it's in a drawer because it's a little bit of a hard sell because the main character's a teenager, but it's not. It's a bit of dark stuff happened in the children's theatre. All boys, remember?
Yeah.
But it's not a young adult books.
Yeah.
So I think of that as my practice historical novel. And what it gave me, I decided he needed someone to teach him sword fighting, and I decided it would be a girl. So then I had to make her the daughter of a swordmaster, and she was just such a fabulous character. She just barged her way onto the page, and then afterwards I thought, I just want to write something fun. So I thought, she's just saying, I've got a book on my own. So I did. So that's how the first one came about, and I had it in my head that there was a lot of mileage in this character and her story, and that it could be a series. So after I wrote the first one, I had a better idea of where I was heading and what I was trying to do.
And we are, of course, talking about the wonderful Lucinda.
Yes, Lucinda.
Just one of the best female characters. I think we all of the women in the writers group, we all just said what a fabulous character she is. And you get a lot of feedback on her as well, don't you?
Yes.
She's made for the screen too. Just putting that out there.
Yes, absolutely. Because I see it very filmically in my head. Yeah.
I mean, you as a writer, me as a reader.
Yeah. Oh, that's good to know. Yeah. Because I really do, and I write a lot of dialogue. I have to actually put a lot of the description back in retrospectively because it's the to and fro of the dialogue that I hear, and I see the characters straying about, and I forget that other people aren't necessarily seeing in that head, so then I've got to make sure I've written it in as well.
And we're going to talk about how you balance that dialogue with the action and the interiority and all of that later. Just while we're still on this sort of bigger picture of these novels, that first novel was set in Shakespeare time, and so is this one. And our very dear friend Penelope Janu, she said, can you please ask this question of Terri? Why does she and many others have this particular fascination for this period in history in this novel? What is it about this Shakespeare connection?
Well, initially it was that story about the children's theatre that drew me in, but I really love the period, even though it hasn't been, it's not traditionally hugely popular for historical, but I think that could change because to me there was a huge flourishing around Shakespeare's time with all the plays, and it was kind of like the big flourishing of Hollywood in the 30s. There was this big creative output and how they had the studio system. Well, I think that was like it during Shakespeare's time in the theatre, and it was the culture of the people. They performed for the court, but they also were the first mass entertainment, really, for people, where anyone could come. And so they had to appeal to a really broad range, and they were reflecting what was going on. And there's a lot of innuendo, and there's a lot of political commentary that's a bit oblique in there, and it was just, I think, a really fun time. However, there was also plague and high infant mortality, which I get into quite a bit. So, but it was a big time when there's a lot of flourishing ideas and a lot of creative people bouncing off each other. So I just always found that really fascinating. And having been to the Globe Theatre, the reproduction, whatever you would call it, in London, and it's fabulous. If anyone ever gets a chance, it's really great to go to a performance. It's not the most comfortable experience. Definitely take a cushion. Those seats, they
are medieval.
Yeah. No, I don't think their bottoms were as padded as ours are either. But they did hire cushions, so you could hire a cushion. You need one. Plus, also so much. It's because of Shakespeare himself, because he's so well known and so much is written about him. It gives you an in to the period because there were no newspapers then. A lot of other historical periods, newspapers and magazines are a great resource for doing research, but there weren't any then. But there were lots of theatre pamphlets and flyers and the plays themselves are a really great resource. And not just Shakespeare himself, like Ben Jonson was also a really popular playwright at the time, and his works are actually a bit easier to read than Shakespeare's. And there's also a lot of scholarship there. So there's a whole lot of academic articles and things like that. So it makes it a bit easier for the research. And also swords were still a thing. Right. Pistols and firearms were just starting to come in. So, and who doesn't love a good sword fight? Not that there is a right, mind you. They're really hard to write.
You do it seamlessly, and can I just say you do take that research to the nth degree. I think it was at your one of your book launches. You had some swordsmen there.
Yes.
And you've been known to wield.
Yes. I went and learnt fencing, first of all, normal fencing, and then I went along and learnt actual historical fencing. And when you're 5 foot, not quite 2, you get clonked on the head a lot, I have discovered, because they can hit anywhere with normal fencing, the épée and foil that I was doing. You can only hit in a certain zone in the middle. But historical fencing, anything goes. But, I mean, you wear a helmet and it's practice, so it's not full force. Yeah. But my only weapon as a very short, small woman was that sometimes I'm quick and you just take them out of the knee.
Perfect. Using your short stature to your advantage.
But the reason I did want to go and learn was I wanted to make sure it was feasible that women could hold the weapons. Yeah. And that's another reason I made my main character tall and big, so that she did have the strength, and she's grown up learning to fight. So I wanted to make sure, because they are heavy, and like a rapier, people think it's like something, a little weapon. It's not. It's a big long sword, and it was for piercing and thrusting rather than slashing. So there's a lot more technique involved, and that made it a perfect weapon for a woman to be really good at, because it was more technique than brute strength.
Yeah, so there are a whole lot of reasons why that particular period in time was the perfect setting for this novel. But also there were a lot of opportunities to insert conflict and up the stakes in a novel, because all sorts of horrible things were happening. all sorts of fascinating things were happening as well, like the gunpowder plot and all of these things. So you're able to weave those sorts of things in, weren't you?
Yeah, it was a big period of change because I'm writing the start of the 1600s and Queen Elizabeth died 1603. So it was the start of the Stuart reign. So there was this big influx of Scots. So then I could have a Scot as my main hero and love interest, because who doesn't love,
Who doesn't love a Scot?
Yes, I know. Yes, that accent.
And thank you, Outlander, for making them very popular.
Exactly. Yes, no, I'm not trying to tap into that at all. No.
But hey, why not?
Exactly. Yeah. So like I said, so I think periods in history where there's a lot of change and transition periods are more interesting and there's a lot more meat.
So how do you get that balance between the fact and the fiction? Because like you said, one of the baby author
rookie errors,
let's say, the rookie errors is to do all of this research and then try and cram it all into a novel. And you never feel when you're reading these novels that you're being dished up a whole bunch of exposition at all. How do you get that balance right?
Well, my approach is like I do a lot of reading, and I couldn't find my notebook because we've moved house, but I was going to show you. But it's all these scribblings, and I've got some timelines of things that happen and research that I've done about different people. And I just write down all these notes and thinking that I might use this and I might use that, but I end up using maybe half of it. And the other thing that I think helps to be able to stick to the story, because you've got to put, I heard a quote, I can't remember who it was from, but it was story first, his story second.
Ah, great quote.
Yeah. Sorry, I can't attribute that, but I thought, that's what you have to hang your hook on. And I think that's for any type of writing. So what helps and makes it easier is, like, I've got some real events and I've tried to you have to make decisions about how true you're going to stay to the facts. And I decided, like, if there are known events in the known timeline of facts, I'll stick to that as much as I can. And then any deviation, you put in notes at the end. And I have a couple of characters, but they're only side characters that are real. Like Mole was based on a real person. And I mentioned, the kings and different politicians and things like that, and they're based on real people. And Lucinda's father was based on a real person.
Oh, was he? I didn't know that. Okay.
But all we know about him, all I knew was because there were lists of, there used to be this guild called the Masters of Defence, and they were the accredited by the king, people allowed to teach sword skills and weapons training and defence. And he was one of them, and they have some of the records. They don't have all the records because of the Great Fire, blah, blah, but they've got partial records. And he's listed John Evans, Master of Defence, Whitefriars. So, but that's all we know. But I thought, I'll pinch that name, and I knew where Whitefriars was. But my main characters, and you'll notice that a lot in historical fiction, that the main characters are often fictional, and because then you can play, and then you can put the story first. So that makes it easier. Like, I really admire historical fiction writers that you based their novels on kings and queens, because that's actually really hard, because there's a lot more known, and people get cranky if you mess around with the facts too much. And like Hilary Mantel,
Yeah.
I know how she did that. Amazing. But again, she did talk about, you find the gaps in history, and that's where an author can really play and their imagination can grow, and you draw out the character.
So taking John Evans, for example, who was a real person, and all you had to go on was his name from the guild and Whitefriars.
Yeah.
And yet the Defence Academy, where men went to practice their fencing skills, that was so fully realised.
Yes.
So what do you do then? Do you go into maps of London and houses of London? And
yes. Yeah. And I found this awesome, which I will show you later. It's hilarious. It was actually from a fencing school in, I think it was Belgium. There's this drawing of this fencing school, and it's hilarious. And it's got someone who's missed and impaled a fellow fencer through there. It's got all silly stuff, but it's really laid out well. And I thought, yes, that's kind of how I imagined it in my head. And I'd looked at a map of Whitefriars and I knew it used to be a friary, like monks, and that they have cloisters. So I thought, well, they'd probably do this and they'd probably do that. And often the stuff I've used logic for to predict things, when I've delved deeper, it turns out that it was actually like that.
I think it was Peter Fitzsimons says when he's writing his non-fiction, but he says to his researchers, I want the sights, the smells, the sounds. And I feel like you got all of that, or you do get all of that in all the novels that you've written.
The other thing that I found really helpful for the period, and for people writing other periods, if you can go to historical reenactments or things like medieval fairs, and you'll have, like, if you're writing Vikings, there's people that do the Viking area and they're doing the cooking and they're wearing the clothes and they make the clothes and they have the weapons, and there's people that make the weapons. They're fantastic if you can go to, because I found being able to touch, well, once you're allowed to touch, but see and imagine the objects that would be in a person's life made it a lot easier for me. So again, thank you, Shakespeare. I stayed for a few days, and when I was doing my research for the other book, I was able to, because I pretended to be an academic.
You are an academic. Dr. Terri Green.
I was able to go into the archives of the Royal Shakespeare Trust and at the Globe Theatre. So they've got amazing books and objects, and also the Royal Shakespeare Trust, you go into the houses, and then Mary Arden's farm is set up, and school kids go there, a bit like the old Sydney town was, or Sovereign Hill. Yeah, so it's set up, and people volunteer, and they have the clothing, and they wear the clothing, and they cook the food. And I also went to Hampton Court Palace, which is fantastic, and if you go into the kitchens, the guys there are cooking, and you can ask them questions about the food, and so I, shoot their ear off. And
it's all great stuff, isn't it? Yeah. Because it adds that texture and layer to your fiction. And those reenactments, that's such a great idea as well, because there's nothing quite like hearing the clock of a sword on armour or whatever it might be, I imagine, that you wouldn't normally hear in your everyday.
She uses a bow and arrow in one bit, of course, but so being able to pick one up and feel what it's like.
The tension and the sound of it as you're clocking it back. Yeah, right.
Yeah, so that's one thing I'd really recommend for people. And then once you start talking to people, because it's their thing, they will often, you can often email and ask questions, and
they know a lot.
Like I did with the sword people. They love people asking about it and someone writing about it. The other thing that's useful is academics and people doing PhDs, because if you go, JSTOR is a really good reference. And if you just, type in something or other, like, I think I might have typed in sword fighting Elizabethan era, something like that, and then all these articles and research and things would come up, and then you'll get sent other articles that might be of interest. And the other good thing to do is if you're reading textbooks or books on your era, is to look in the bibliography.
Ah, of course.
Yeah, because then that will often link you to other things. Yeah. But often the academic articles, like you read through you just sort of skim the jargon a bit. And again, often there'll be links in their bibliography, because they have to be really strict about their bibliographies and everything they've cited. So it often gives you little cues into other things. Oh, that might be really useful.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
I'll put a link in the show notes to JSTOR.
Yeah.
But they're great tips. I imagine you went down quite a few rabbit holes there, Terri.
Oh, yeah, that's the thing. And even like the current book that I've just finished, because I had the Danish king.
Yes.
I was lucky enough to go to Copenhagen last year and went to a palace that he built. And their website of the palace, the Royal Palace, is great, and there's pictures and I saw hanging on the wall a portrait of this king that I've been writing about. Yeah, so sometimes you go a little sideways routes to get the information you need, especially if, when you're writing pre-newspapers, magazines, you can't just go into Trove and find that sort of stuff. But the state libraries in each state are really useful, because the librarians can store you, and they've got access to JSTOR and things like that, and they can source articles.
I think you mentioned before that you found a great quote in the Globe magazine.
Yes. When I was over in England, I went to performance at the Globe, and it was a program.
Oh, it was a program.
It was a program. This is a quote from an actor who was going to be playing in Othello. His name's Sam Sproul, and I thought this perfectly sums up the purpose of historical fiction for me. So here it is. If we get it right, it will really speak to a modern audience, and we won't be thinking about the world 400 years ago. We'll be thinking about the world now.
What's old is new again.
Yeah, and people don't change.
True.
Society and culture and norms change, but people are still the same.
We have the same motivations and the same love
Desires
and loss and
yearnings.
betrayals and yeah, exactly. I love that quote because it also goes to how cleverly you put a feminist lens across the history as well.
Oh, you noticed that?
Oh, yes, I did, just a little. That's one of my favourite parts about the novels, actually, how kick-ass Lucinda and the Sisters of the Sword are.
Yes, it is subversively feminist, yes, but you're having fun at the same time, hopefully.
Yeah.
Yes.
Tell me about that. Is that an overarching?
Yes, it was a deliberate choice. Because in the first novel, and this is why I knew I would have trouble getting it published traditionally, I was sick of reading crime fiction and historical fiction where the woman's a victim and then nothing, is resolved about that. So I didn't want to write murder. So I knew I wanted to write about things that affect women, crimes that affect women, problems that affect women that are relevant today as well as they were then. And so in the first novel, it concerns rape, but the women band together to find who the perpetrator is because the men aren't interested in doing it. And
satisfying.
In the second book, it's not the main theme, it's more a sub-theme of, again, how men have used women's bodies and are using women when it suits them and then just discard them or discount their opinions when it doesn't suit them. So in each novel, I want to address something a little bit different. Yeah. And as the character's getting older, she's encountering different problems because she's also as well as her father being a swordmaster, her mother died and her twin brother when she was young, which is very Shakespearean, she's been the daughter surviving fraternal twin, like Shakespeare's Hamlet, which may or may not have been a deliberate choice. I don't think it was. I think that was subliminal, that one. So her grandmother has helped to bring her up, and her grandmother is a midwife and healer, and because her grandmother's getting on and her eyesight's not good, she's taking Lucinda along and training her. Normally women wouldn't have trained as midwives until they'd had a couple of children, but her grandmother says, well, that would have been your mother, but your mother's not here, so sorry, you're it.
And I love some of those subplots that come in via the midwifery are also really compelling.
Yes, so you get this, and that also means you can cross society. So they're going from treating prostitutes to more wealthy women.
Was the first book was that going to be a standalone, or was it always going to be a series?
I think I had it in the back of my mind that it could be a series. Yes, yeah. And I had an idea. I did have that idea early on that I wanted it to be about women's issues, but I wanted it to be fun as well as serious. Because I think if it's too dark and serious, it's just too much. So I try and lighten it, and I can't not be silly. Like I always have a scene that's a little bit slapstick. Yeah. But only one or two. I think you can get away with one or two. Yeah. More than that, and it's too much. Yeah. And I like that, like what in Pride and Prejudice, that repartee and the wit. Yeah, so I knew I wanted that. But I think, I always did have it in the back of my mind that it was going to be a series. I wanted some crime elements. I wanted humour. I wanted female, this is really hard to say, female swashbuckle. Swashbuckle. And I just wanted this fun, kick-ass heroine. I'm not a planner. I just have this vague concept in the back of my mind, and then as things progress, they start to become more concrete.
So you didn't plan any of these novels? Like when you sit down to write, you just write? How much outlining is there?
I don't outline. I have tried, and there's something deeply inside me that resists planning. And I can't even do it retrospectively. Even when, you're supposed to go through and write what happens in each scene, I get to about halfway and I just can't do any more.
Okay.
I just have to let it do it intuitively. And then what I can do is look back and think, go to that percentage point and that percentage point and see if I've sort of got those spots. Yeah. And I usually have. I think, oh, okay, wing to that one. But what I do know sort of the start. There's sometimes that's changed. I've moved it a little bit, but I know what's happening at the start, what sets things off. And I know what's the end I'm going for. It's all the bits in the middle that I've got to figure out. And sometimes scenes come to me, like the one with the water wheel, like that. I'd been reading about the water wheel of London, which I didn't know. There was this water wheel, and that sounds like it got water up from the Thames, and it was churning. And I thought, well, things could get caught up in that. So I started writing this baby that turns up out of the river, this dead baby. I'm thinking, well, how did it get there? What happened? What's the story? And for a while, I thought, actually, I don't think this scene belongs to this book. This must be from a different book. And then it just wouldn't go away. And then I figured out a way. I thought, actually, I can make this work. And then, so that's how the subplot's all connected. But I can't plan that. Yeah. And the way the cross patterns work, those interconnections. I think it's my puzzle-solving brain, because I like doing Sudokus and crosswords and that sort of stuff.
And you're also, we should say, a physio.
Yeah.
And so with that job, you've done many, many jobs within that sort of physio health realm, where you're having to look at a person and put the pieces of the puzzle together as to what has happened to create this injury, and then and like, so you have it is a bit the same, because you have all this knowledge, but in the moment when someone turns up, you've just got to wing it. You're on the spot. You've got to have a process, but I've always been quite intuitive in that regard, and I sort of look and go, but if I have to think about what I'm doing, then I go, I don't know. This is boring now.
I just can see that. So I think writing often a bit like, so you have all the knowledge sitting there, and then, but there's something, it's like putting together puzzles. But I also imagine it like plot for me, because I usually have 3 strands. I have the kind of the romancy relationship strand. I'll have the women's issues strand, and I'll have the external plot, political stuff going on. And I always think of the DNA strands, how they spiral around together. And somehow I've got to get those strands all winding around each other correctly.
Yeah, which you do brilliantly. In fact, I wanted to ask you to read some of An Unsuitable Pursuit, because, I mean, you have these DNA strands with the writing itself as well, and the way you combine action and dialogue and description and interiority as well is so good, and sort of the emotional reaction of a character when they're being asked to do something. So, yes, you've got to have an action, but then you've got this emotional reaction and this interiority going on as well as this wonderful dialogue and, a bit of description and setting, because you've got to place this in time and place as well. And I think it's because of this, you always manage to get that balance really right. Can you read us a bit to demonstrate that?
Yes, I will read this little passage, because I think it shows action and interiority, even though it's a reaction scene, not in terms of the plot. So what's happened beforehand? So basically the plot with this is she has to spy for the love interest's uncle. And because of all her skills, the uncle has been using her as a spy, and she's meant to be spying on people that come to his father's fencing academy. Because it wasn't just people learning, as people would come to practice, and there was Catholic dissent at the moment in the lead up. So some of the gunpowder plotters have been coming along to the academy. So she's been tasked with doing that. In the previous book, there was a Spaniard diplomat who fancied her, and they think that because there was a treaty signed with Spain, at the end of 1604, and they still don't trust the Spaniards because going back to the Armada, they'd been at war, so like I think nearly 20 years. And now suddenly since James came in, he wanted peace because peace brings prosperity. But still don't trust the Spanish. And Cavendish, who's the love interest's uncle, he is also a spy master and controls all these informants. So he has Lucinda spying for him in the academy, and then he calls her in, tells the nephew he's lined up a marriage for him, and he wants Lucinda to seduce the Spaniards to find out information because they think there's a plot brewing. Spain might be involved. They don't trust them. So that's what she's been asked to do. Problem is, she's actually a virgin. She may have had a little bit of exploratory activity in the past and helping her grandmother. She knows the consequences of what happens if you
fool around too much.
Yes, go too far. So anyway, so this is her reaction after. So she's just found out the person she loves has got to marry this noble woman.
That's Robert.
Yes, Robbie McCrae. Yes. I have no Scottish accent.
You have a much better one than I do.
And so she's just found that out, and this is her reaction. A rapier simply would not do. She needed something heavier and harder to execute a suitable vengeance. With great deliberation, Lucinda selected the perfect weapon, a beautifully crafted broadsword designed for wreaking destruction. Given the circumstances, her weapon of choice was both appropriate and ironic, since it was the sword given to her by Robert McCrae. Sighting her target, she adopted a wide stance, adjusted her grip on the hilt, and raised the sword. A growl came from deep within her, from some raw place of hurt and scorn, as she swung the blade down with cold-blooded rage. She slashed, she sidestepped, she charged at her target, thrusting the glinting steel tip exactly where she imagined Cavendish's heart would be, if he actually had a heart. Of course, he must in the literal sense, but as for a heart that had the capacity for love, compassion, or any kind of tender feeling, that heart he sorely lacked. "Feel better now?" Grandma Jones said, sneaking up behind her, making her jump and turn around with the sword still in her hand. "It is so unfair, the lot of women. Don't you ever simply want to scream?" "Quite often, though not as much as when I was young." Lucinda sheathed her sword and surveyed the damage she had inflicted upon the dummy. It was made from bundled reeds, tightly bound in layers of sackcloth, reeds she collected from the riverside house of one of the Academy's patrons. Now the sackcloth hung in tatters, slash marks crisscrossed its surface, and the remnants of reed were scattered all over the floor. Some of the cuts had penetrated deep into the dummy's bulk. Such was the force of her attack.
Beautiful. And also a perfect example of that mix of action and interiority, which I think it's really hard for new writers in particular to get that right, isn't it? That either one way or the other. What's the importance of including interiority?
Well, I'm still coming to grips with that.
But you do it very naturally. I mean, it's that emotional reaction.
Sometimes I have to go and add it in after. Yeah, I do.
You get caught up in the action.
Yes, exactly. Because, I tend to have to get the plot down, and I get some of that down for some scenes, but there's others where, and that's the editor usually picks me up on, it'll be deeper. But what she's feeling now, what does she think about this? So they're the comments I get from the editor. So then I usually have to go in. They're very noisy.
The kookaburras also have something to say about this.
They just think I'm so hilarious.
I don't know if anyone else can hear that, but there's kookaburras in the tree outside. Okay, are you quite done? Can Terri continue?
I think they might be now.
Thank you very much.
Yes. Yeah, so for me, and I think you get to know your habits the more you write. So I know, yes, dialogue, I'm always very dialogue heavy, and then I've got to add in more, and I've usually got the action because I've had to really choreograph that, and sometimes I've got out Barbie dolls with teddy bears and they've been doing my...
Just to make sure that all the arms are in the right place and there aren't three legs. And,
yes, so that it works. So I've usually got that, but then sometimes, it's often the emotion, the interiority that I've got to add in later. It depends on the scene. Sometimes if it's been a really emotional scene, I'll have plenty of that and I won't have enough action, like movement or action. Yeah. So you've just got to balance things out. Like earlier on, I found Maggie Lawson's edit system really helpful, where you colour code. Have you ever done that one?
Yeah, we talked about that.
But then after a while, you sort of internalise it. So what she does is you colour code dialogue. I think it's with blue, actions red, emotion. Like if it's a visceral emotion, I think it's pink, and you only want a sprinkling of that, and then interiority is yellow and description is green. And it can be within a sentence, you'll have all different colours. So, but it just gives you, and you want to have a mix of those colours. But if you see like a great big slab of blue, you think, that dialogue, it's talky, no action. And it might only be just a little action, a movement or a gesture or whatever. But then that's just, if you see that, you need to insert something to break it up.
That's a great exercise to do. Actually, I think I've got a link to Maggie Lawson's colour coding technique, so I'll pop that in the show notes as well. It's really useful.
Well, like I said, you've probably internalised it. Know, look, and you can tell, you just say, talky, or actually,
But if you've got a scene that's not quite working and you're not sure why, you could apply that colour coding just to get, it can be quite obvious.
It often helps. You think, okay.
So how do you get into the voices of your characters? Because your voices are so strong. And just thinking about Lucinda and Robbie, I can't say Lucinda, Robbie McRae, the Scotsman, they have that sort of witty repartee that just sparkles that dialogue. They have these really distinct personalities, as do all the Sisters of the Sword. Tell me how you get into the voices and what you do to sort of differentiate. Are you a method writer, Terri?
No, possibly schizophrenic, no, because I hear these voices in my head.
Do you? You hear them very clearly in your head?
I hear the voices. I have more trouble actually bringing visual images to mind, but hearing... Don't you have conversations with your main characters in your head all the time? Doesn't everybody do that? I think that's just something that for me comes more naturally, but for other people it doesn't. But I think you've just got to have an ear for dialogue and know that men's speech patterns are different to women's. And you just, as you get to know your characters, you just know, oh no, they wouldn't say that. They'd say it like this. Yeah. And because they're quite very different characters, it makes it easier. Because Mole is a cut purse, which
is a thief.
Because there were no pockets then, so there was no such thing as a pickpocket.
You cut the purse.
Get the gold. They had purses which were tied on by strings to people's belts. So they cut the strings, so that's why they were called a cut purse. She was a cut purse, and now she's more like what we would call a fence. A bit of a chancer. So she's very distinct, and she's a wonderful character, and she is based on a real person who was basically a bit of a stand-up comedian at the time too, I think. And so she says some outrageous things.
Yeah, she's all about the reaction, isn't she? And being as outrageous as possible.
Yes, and she was a cross-dresser. She went around London, and they've got drawings of, and they've read a play about it, dressed as a man. So she's got a very distinctive voice. Lucinda, it comes from her personality. Robbie, my husband's going to listen to this, but I actually think of my husband, he's very witty, and we often have these exchanges, which are often quite rude, as in a lot of double entendre, and so that I tap into that a bit. And then ones that are a bit more a different class, so then they'll speak slightly more formally, not be as bawdy. So it really just comes from the character, thinking,
how would they speak?
What would this character say? And, of course, the read aloud test. Because sometimes something that looks good written, when you read it, it's clunky. The rhythm's not right. So I'm very, tuned into the rhythm and how they sound. So sometimes I will just rewrite something because I think that just doesn't sound right. So especially now with audiobooks, one of these days it'd be nice to have these as audiobooks.
They'd be great as audiobooks.
Yeah, because again, they're quite dialogue-y, heavy.
Speaking of double entendre, one of the things I love about your writing is the wit and the humour, which is very hard to do well. I think, in any kind of fiction, but you do pull it off very well, Terri.
I will go the joke. And I think, again, was my job, because often I would get people on board by making a joke and mucking around, not bawdy jokes with patients, but that's a bit of my modus operandi. And I actually have to pull back on the jokes in my writing because I go too far. And I remember reading somewhere, I can't remember who said it, that in their writing they're happy to go too far and have an editor say, no, peel that back.
That could have been Toni Jordan.
It might have been.
Yeah,
I think it was. Yeah, I think it was. Yeah.
She packs so many jokes into her books that she has to pare it back.
Yeah,
but
well,
I'm just have too many than too few.
I'm the same, because you can always pull out. It's harder to put in. Yeah. But again, different writers, you'll always have something that you need to work and putting more in and pull stuff out. So this is, have to give away a bit of the plot. So what happens is she manages not to have to seduce the Spaniard because what he actually wants, he's an artist. What he wants is a naked model because he wants to paint Diana the Huntress. And I had a ball looking up later, and I did a series on Facebook and Insta on it, on Diana of the Day. It was a thing for painters over centuries to paint Diana the Huntress. And you look at some of these Dianas and they're a bit doughy looking, and I think that woman could never pull a bow and arrow. She is not a huntress. And Lucinda is strong and tall and striking. So, he really, really wants to paint her. Now, this is when she is trying to seduce him. She's organised this little rendezvous where they're going to do a bit of sword fighting together, and she's sort of implying that maybe it could be a bit more.
And she's trying to get information out of him.
Yeah. So they're out. It's an outdoor area where she goes and cuts the reeds, and it's private, and they're about to do some sword fighting. And his name is Signor de Guerra.
De Guerra.
So she's got a dress on, but she has breeches underneath, so she's taking them off, and she makes him turn away. "Are you finished now?" he asked, taking her sigh as his cue to turn around to face her, which set off another flare of colour in her cheeks. The sooner they got to the sword fighting, the better. She was far more comfortable facing a rapier than a handsome man's gaze. But after the rapier play, what then? What else did he expect? It was far too cold out here to undress, but a bit of cold was no deterrent for a bit, or even a lot, of kissing and touching. Good thing she was wearing breeches instead of a skirt. Breeches were more of a challenge for a wandering hand. The thought of hands invading breeches sent her thoughts skipping back to McRae. She knew what was packed inside his breeches. No doubt all men were much the same, endowed with similar equipment and prone to the same impulses. But she did not know for sure. She should have asked Annie when she had the chance. Was there much variation in shape and size, for instance? If fencing was anything to go by, there must be variations in technique and style. The British were known for brute strength and their frontal assaults, the Scots for being unpredictable and attacking from all angles, while the Spanish were renowned for their speed and flair. Was that only true for fencing, or a general indication of their approach to anything physical? She sighed again. There was only one way to find out.
I love that. So good, Terri. It's funny and also a good demonstration of that interiority again. That's an indication of the sort of humour that is right throughout your novels, but not overly so. I mean, you're dealing with some pretty serious issues. Like, as I said earlier, your novels are just a perfect blend, I think, of all those things. So tell us about what happens when you sit down to write a scene. Let's say the opening scene of the novel we're talking about, An Unsuitable Pursuit. The first novel has been put away.
Yeah.
You're thinking maybe there's a third one in the future, and you're sitting down to write the second one in the series.
Yeah.
The pressure. What happens in your brain when you sit down and go, right, chapter 1?
Okay, well, I knew where the first one ended. The couple had sort of come together and acknowledged their feelings, and he gave her symbolically this sword, which was an acknowledgement that women could look after themselves. And a recognition of her strength. So anyway, so they have that, and you can tell they're in love, but again, it's a bit of the blighted lovers thing, but what are they going to do about it? But then he disappears for 6 months. he's sent away by his uncle to find out information about what the Spaniards are up to, basically. But we don't know that. So at the start of the novel, I had in my head, he's back. And I knew for the love story, because they're from such different classes, I knew I couldn't realistically get them together in one novel. It was going to take at least to the end of the second one. I thought it might take me 3, but in the end I did manage to do it by the end of the second. So I knew that was my starting point, that it's this love story, a bit of a Romeo and Juliet story because of societal pressures and the uncle's expectations. And I've had people say, oh, why couldn't he just tell his uncle no? But the thing is, that was the thing I had to add in a bit more motivation to and make it clearer. It was also his sister, because his sister was dependent on the uncle. And if all right for him to throw everything away and take his chances elsewhere, but then his sister was also beholden to his uncle, and he couldn't just leave her in the lurch and face any consequences. So I had these 2 people who are madly in love with each other, and she's working at her father's fencing academy. And then suddenly I started writing that scene about the and that's when my Google got...
About the baby.
Yeah, about the baby that turns up in the water. And that's when my Google got very weird.
Yeah, don't look up the Google search history of write-up people.
So I wrote the opening, and then I was writing these other scenes, and then I was starting to figure out where it was going. And I sort of can figure out a certain way, and then I get stuck, and then I've got to sit. But the other tip that I find useful is I name my chapters.
Oh, okay.
And I name my chapters, and I think I probably got this from The Book Thief.
I was just going to say, Marcus Zuzak talks about that. He treats the chapter headings as a guide
to what's going to happen.
Exactly.
Yes, so I do the same.
Love that idea.
And sometimes I've changed a little bit where I think it's going to go, it doesn't work when it doesn't. So like chapter 1, for instance, is a sudden return.
There you go.
That's what happens.
That's about the return.
That's what kicks off. Chapter 2 is called Unwanted, because there's a theme here about prostitutes' babies, basically, and what happened to them. So, as I'm going, I give them names. And I might get to about 10 chapters that I've got names for, and then after that, I've got nothing.
You're off and running, but though.
Yeah.
And they're quite short chapters too, aren't they?
Yes. Yeah.
So you're really keeping that pace, cracking along.
Yeah. I think I tend to write between 2,500 to 5,000. I find if you're going over 5, it's too long.
Too long.
And if it's getting up to 5.5, often then I'll just chop the chapter in half.
Is that the sort of thing that comes as you're writing, or more in the editing where you're sort of going, this is going on a bit long, I need to chop it in 2, or I need to really reduce the words in this chapter?
What I find is the software tools really helpful for that. So I started out using Scrivener.
Yeah.
And now I'm using a different program a little bit more, which is Atticus.io, which is like simplified Scrivener, and that's just a lot clearer. But it still has the same, you can get the word count, and just with the click of the mouse, you can look at word count in the chapter or in the whole novel, and it splits it up into scenes. You can just reorder your chapters, you can reorder scenes, you can mix stuff around really easily from the side panel. And you've got that pane down there, so it's actually sort of outlining your novel for you, so you can see the shape of it.
Especially if you've got those chapter headings as well, because you can immediately see, well, it's not just chapter 17.
And the other thing I like on Atticus, because I originally got it to edit because I just, as in format, because I don't do Apple. And Apple, the other main formatting tool, only does Apple. So this was a new tool. So if you flick into the editing mode, you can look at what you're writing as if it would appear on an iBook, a Kindle, a Nook, or a printed version.
Wow.
Yes. And sometimes when I'm stuck, I will flick over and have a look at it in a different version, and it gives you a different way of seeing the words.
That's amazing.
Yeah. And you can just see what a printed chapter would look like. So you can see if I've gone one sentence into a new chapter, do I really want to do that? How about I cut that down so it ends? Yeah, so it helps with that layout and how a book will physically look.
So you can write in it, you can edit it, and then if you are self-publishing, you can
just
send
click
it
the
off.
button and it does it.
No.
Yes, you just pick your styles. And the other thing I found a little tricky, you can pick a few different dinkuses, the little scene break things. What I didn't realise in the first novel is that I had it set to quite large. I have these quite large looking sword dinkuses. And then I learned how to make them smaller.
Right.
So there's a few little quirks to it. But it's got quite a lot of different formats and styles. So it just makes your job really easy.
Yeah, because I know from talking to people who have self-published that the formatting to get it ready for all the different formats is one of the biggest headaches and is best outsourced. But this sounds like it's an amazing program.
Yes, I'm not a techie person, and I had 2 days where I was swearing at it continuously, but that was about 3 or 4 years ago, and they've updated it, and you only have to. It's a one-off subscription.
Okay. And
so it just constantly updates. You don't ever have to keep getting updates. It just does it. Yeah.
That sounds terrific.
And actually I put Jo Nell onto it.
She said she likes the look of it too.
Yeah, it is.
She said it's got a really nice interface.
It is. It's really clear, whereas I find Scrivener a bit I don't know, it looks like old typewritten stuff a bit. Yeah.
It's kind of like being on an old DOS machine or something, isn't it?
Yeah, a little bit, yes. Just visually it's got a lot of clarity. And it was designed by a guy who's a software guy and a writer.
Yeah, right. That brings us to editing. Because these are self-published, you are having to edit yourself, but also outsource some of the editing. So talk us through that process, that whole editing process, and what are some of the things you had to change up as you went through?
Okay, so to start with, when it's where I'm reasonably happy with it, but I'm not worrying about spelling, punctuation so much, but people still tell you.
They do, but I find when you say to me, I need you to have a read through this, I don't worry about the spelling and everything, because I know
it's going to change.
You know you're going to pick that up anyway.
Yeah, I'm going to fix it. So I like to then send it out to some trusted readers, and because I've got this great writing group, and there's quite a few of us, 8 of us, so we just send it out, and whoever's got the time will read it. Like at the time, 2 people might have the time and they'll read it when it's at a certain point. And I tell the other people, well, don't worry, you wait and I'll send you.
Yes, I'm saving you up
for the next version. So it's a bit random who does what. It really does what fits into their life, who's less busy, because everyone's busy. But I ask specific questions. So things like, does the story hang together as a whole? Because that's the thing I really want to know, because I don't plot in advance and I have to fill in holes. And are there holes that I've missed? Are there any dull or flat bits? Because sometimes you can pick those yourself, and sometimes you think they are, but other people think, no, it's not. You're just bored with it because you've gone over it 10 billion times.
You need the third party.
And I asked, are there things that don't make sense? Or is there enough description to set the scene? Is the ending too twee? And with this, I actually changed the ending because I thought it was too twee. And I ended up putting that ending as an epilogue. Because it was very much the happy ever after romance ending.
Yeah.
And then I listened to a podcast called Fated Mates, and they were talking about making the hero earn the
happy ever
after. Making him, they used the word grovel. So, and after I heard that, I changed the ending. I thought, yes, I need to make him grovel.
There you go.
So I did.
So, because we are doing spoilers, can you do a...
Yeah, so in the original one, yes, it was a little bit of probably a bit more rushed, and then I had the wedding and, they go off, into the sunset. But in the final scene, I made it that she said, no, I'm done with you. See you later. So he had to come grovelling back to her and really earn her respect.
Which is great, because it keeps the reader really hanging to the very last as well.
Yes, because people have said that to me. I kept thinking, there's only a few more pages left, and I can get them together.
Will they or won't they?
Yeah, exactly. He gives her a different weapon. That's right, because the year before he gave her a Scottish broadsword. So he's peace offering. He's, yes, I was wrong. Yeah, he says to her, last year, as a token of my regard, I gave you the gift of a broadsword, a Scottish broadsword. It is only now I realise it was ill-chosen. I have here an English rapier, the weapon you are a master of. He paused and took a deep breath and gazed up at Lucinda. Lucinda Evans, nothing in the world will make me happier than for you to ask me to marry you. If you did, I would seal our betrothal with the gift of this sword as proof that Scotland does not rule England.
Oh,
One is not superior to the other. They are combined in one accord.
oh, so enlightened. How Robbie?
She makes him though. Yeah.
And that's his growth as a character.
Yes.
Lovely. See what you did there, Terri. Well done.
Yes, what I did. So yes, no, that's not feminist. No, not at all.
So then you've got your trusted readers, and we all give you certain feedback based on the things that you'd like to know, like which are the flat bits.
And then they'll often give me other insights
you might not have even thought of.
Yes, and like one was initially that she sort of didn't believe that Lucinda would do that. There wasn't enough motivation, so I had to make it clearer that she did feel that she had to, keep spying, seduce this guy, because he had threatened her family and he had evidence of stuff she'd done that could land her in prison. So I had to up that motivation, make it clearer.
Which is good because that adds to tension and stakes and all of that good stuff.
Yes. So I added in that, and I paid an editor to do sort of pretty much a structural edit, but they usually don't have to do a lot. It's more that they're checking, you've got the structure, but it may be you've got a little bit too much. I tend to write too long in the first and rush the end. I think everyone does. So I usually have to peel back the beginning and woof out the end. Yeah, that's very technical.
Woof it out.
Woof it out.
Did they teach you that in creative writing doctor school?
No, not at all. They teach literary writing. I can write literary, but I don't want to write literary. I think literary fiction needs to be a good story too.
Absolutely.
And there's a lot of it's more about motivation and clarifying things is the sort of feedback that I was getting. I deliberately chose an editor with the second one who hadn't read the first book because I wanted to see if it would hold together as a standalone. And she said, it did, but she needed that little bit more information about sisters.
The Sisters of the Sword.
Yes, that it wasn't clear who was who. So then I went in and thought, that's the tricky thing in writing a series. You need to reiterate a little bit of information. Firstly, because often people won't necessarily read one consecutively after the other. So they won't remember. It could have been months ago that they read it. Or two, they may not have read the earlier book or books. So you need to reorient them. So then I retrospectively added in that orientation information that you need.
I feel like that can be a really hard thing for a writer to do because there's a temptation for it to just become a big slab of exposition.
Yes.
So would you mind reading the part where you added that in?
Yeah. It's not too long. So I think a couple of paragraphs. So this is after she slashed the thing. And it's a meeting of the Sisters of the Swords because they get together once a week. They have the run of the academy on the pretense that it's women's business and there's, the grandmother's healing, but in the afternoon the sword fighters get together. And this is Lucinda thinking, how to describe the sisters? By their appearance, by their nature, by how they survived in the world. They were all so vastly different. Moll, who had started it all off, was the first to arrive. She switched identity between male and female depending on what she was up to. But lately she had taken to wearing men's breeches all of the time. This meant she had to cover herself with a lady's cloak to come to Whitefriars on Women's Day, a small inconvenience she was more than willing to suffer. The smell of tobacco smoke followed Moll into the training room. Smoking being another man's habit Moll had taken to with great enthusiasm, along with arming herself with a long and lethal alehouse dagger. Rosalind McCrae was the next to arrive. She was calm of nature, refined, and a great beauty. She was also Robert McCrae's younger sister and the niece of Lord Colin Cavendish, though she could not hold that against her. She was even more beholden to the man than Lucinda. Since she was a child, Rosalind had been his ward, dependent on his favours and at the mercy of his whims. Rosalind had joined their group after she was attacked by Corvacho, the rapist. To look at her, No one would ever guess the horror she had faced only 6 months ago. But appearances can be deceptive. Scars can grow thicker with time, and once formed, do they ever truly go away? While Rosalind arrived quietly, Mole's arrival was more like a trumpet fanfare in both volume and effect. She greeted Lucinda with a hearty slap on the back. "What have you been up to this fine week since we last met?" "The usual." Lucinda handed Mole a training rapier from the row she had neatly laid out.
And so on, so on.
Yeah, so I'm introducing each sister as they're arriving at the fencing academy.
Yeah, which is fantastic, because then you go straight into, like, it's sort of sandwiched between, action and dialogue, which is just the way good backstory as well should be inserted. What I love about that also is, particularly listening to Rosalind's story, I want to know more. Like, if I hadn't read the first book, I'd be saying, she was what?
Yes. Oh my God.
Oh my God, what happened to her?
Yes.
I need to read the first book to find out. So it's sort of a little teaser, isn't it? If it's done well, for listeners out there who are writing series, if you do it well, it can be a teaser for your previous novels as well. So,
yeah, because that's the thing, trying to give enough information and raise a question in the reader's mind at the same time. So, yes, but like I said, that little passage wasn't there. I had to put it back in. I think I'd just gone straight in.
As you say, you know what you know as the author, so it's sort of it's very tricky to put yourself back into a new reader's shoes.
Yeah.
It really is. Can you talk to us a little bit about that traditional versus indie publishing idea, and for people who might be sort of sitting on the fence and thinking, do I go to all the trouble of pitching and getting rejections and all that sort of stuff with traditional publishing versus the indie publishing? What drove those decisions for you, Terri?
Well, I think it very much depends on the book you're writing, and I knew what I was writing was not right in the middle lanes. I know. Publishers want, because they're driven by their marketing departments a lot, they want something that they know. They back the favourites. If it was a horse race, they back the favourites. If you're writing in that middle lane of favourites, then probably traditional publishing will work, especially if you're not a fast writer and don't want to have to find out all you need to know about self-publishing, because there's all the marketing and technical stuff. But I knew this series was not probably in that middle lane. It's more like a, not 100 to 1, but that we'll give it a 33 to 1 odds, that. So I thought, no, I haven't got much chance of a traditional publisher. Yeah, well, they won't take a risk, is what I'm saying. So they will go for the lower risk, more sure bet. If you're writing something that's a little bit higher risk, or you really want creative control and don't want to hand it over, or you think, well, I've got to do most of the marketing and publicity for myself anyway, and if they're not necessarily going to sell a zillion copies and you don't really care about seeing your book on a shelf, then you might want to think about self-publishing. And what decided for me, because I thought, it could be all right, but like I pitched to an American publisher. It's the largest independent publisher in America, and they did a lot of romance, and they also did historical. And there was enough of a romance in it, I thought, to call it a romance, but it wasn't strictly. And she said she really liked it, but she can't bring it to market because all that was selling for them at the time was Regency. Bridgerton was, just really hit and was huge, and a little bit of World War II and a little bit of Scottish. And she said, she really loved the concept, she liked the writing, So I said, thank you very much. That is what I wanted to know, because, I thought sometimes towards the era they think, Shakespeare era, no, that doesn't sell. And that's their mindset. But then that just told me, okay, so it's not the writing, it's not the story, it's where it sits in the lanes. And if you're writing something that's that little outer lanes, you can find an audience in self-publishing. And if you don't want, like if I had an Australian publisher, the market is small. True. And this isn't necessarily, like if I was writing something set in Australia, colonial history, that didn't used to sell, but it does now. Or if I was writing Regency, maybe I could have sold. But I just thought, no. I also put myself in the publisher's shoes. So I think if I was a publisher in Australia and someone comes to me with a book set in Shakespearean England and they want to publish it in Australia, I'm thinking, well, no. And England's a weird market. I just don't get it. I don't think anybody gets it. I don't think the English get their market. And again, you're writing a book set in Shakespeare, but you're Australian. You know, then it's the opposite thing.
Yeah.
Whereas in America, they don't care. But they were only selling Regency World War II when everybody Scottish. So
which is crazy to me, because going back to that saying that you said before, it's about the story, not the history.
Yeah.
It shouldn't really matter what time period it's set in.
Yeah. And again, I don't fit. It's not traditional historic romance, because the romance is more to the fore. It's a blend. It's not strictly crime and detective. It's a mix of genres, again, which makes it hard. So I know that. So it's more, okay, so I've just got to do it myself. And I knew as an indie, if you want to go indie, you do need to be able to write volume. But there's some that do quite well. Like there's a woman that's doing quite well because her husband is doing all of marketing. He was a marketing, Facebook ads and everything. But she's only got about 5 or 6 in her series. But they're both making a living out of it.
Wonderful.
And it's like prehistoric cave, like a bit like Clan of the Cave Bear Apparel. And I'm thinking,
those books back when I was a teenager.
So that's more niche, you know,
so
like something
niche.
like that wouldn't get
So
published now because people won't take a risk.
Also, they were door stoppers. Remember how big they were?
Again, they wouldn't get, So there is a market when you look at volume, but then you've just got to then get into the marketing. But you need about 3 books to be able to really effectively market. Just one book just gets lost in the swamp.
I know you were just at the RWA conference last weekend, and I was listening to Pamela Cook's podcast, Rights for Women, this morning, where she did a recap of the whole weekend. I wonder if you were in the session that she was talking about with the self-published author. Can't think of the name, but I'm going to put this in the show notes as well. And she said, if you're going to self-publish, you must be aware that it is 50% writing and 50% business. That's the model and the time split that you're taking on if you're going to self-publish. Would you agree with that?
Probably, especially if you're trying to make a living out of it. I'm not trying to make a living out of it. And a lot of writers aren't. They just want to write stuff, people read their stuff. That's kind of my aim, you know, because I can control that.
Yeah, but you can tell at book launch, like you're just about to release the 3rd in the series, The King's Jewels.
Yeah.
And that split would be pretty fair, I would imagine, with the publishing of it and the doing interviews like this and the admin around that and book launch and getting the marketing done and all your social media and all the things. Like, there's a lot to do on the business side of things. Isn't there?
Some of that you can streamline and you can outsource a bit too, which I'll probably look at doing a little bit. But yes. But then again, traditional publishing, you have to do a lot of that yourself too.
You really do. Even more so these days. As we know from friends who are traditionally published, they're doing a lot of it themselves, and the publishers now expect that.
And like, I'm not lining up book tours or anything like that because I'm not publishing into this market. I'm publishing into an international market, so it's more online stuff. So I'm just going to start, you know, doing more paid advertising, and then there's other things you can do, like try and get a book club deal. And I haven't gone into Kindle Unlimited because once you do that, they won't let you be elsewhere. So I've held off on that because, again, I thought I want more of a series before I put it in KU.
So if you go into KU, Kindle Unlimited, you cannot go on Kobo or Apple Books or any of the other.
You can say you print books anywhere, but like I don't really sell many print books. You know?
So then you've got to make that judgment call. So that's another business decision you have to make.
But I just thought, no, I need at least 3 before I would even consider that. And I can try the other markets first and use them as a bit of a test market and hopefully then have another one just about ready to go.
Anything else that you would say to new writers about that decision, whether to go traditional or indie, or any lessons you've learned from the indie process?
It's a big learning curve. There is a lot of stuff to learn. So you have to be prepared to learn. Like even, you know, like I've learned to format and use a different program, and you have to be, and I've been a bit sporadic with social media. But again, I think if you try and get good at one, like, and I felt like I was just getting good at Instagram, and then they changed it to having to do reels and stuff all the time. I'm thinking that is a bit of a pain. So I was thinking about doing TikToks, and now I'm going to do TikTok because basically Instagram has become like TikTok now. So I'm going to have to do that anyway. So,
even YouTube has got a TikTok-y really thing with the YouTube Shorts. But you can multi-purpose that
exactly.
content.
That's thinking multi-purpose content. Yeah.
On our retreat, I gave a little lesson to my writing friends on how to create reels in Canva. Because even on a big smartphone, which we all have, you know, our fingers can only do so much. It's very fine work, some of it, especially making things bigger and smaller. So if you do it in Canva,
and like get Canva and get the paid version. You can do so much more on the paid version.
You can also do a lot on...
You can do a lot on free, but it can be frustrating because you'll find this image you really want
to remove the background from, and that's only on the pro version.
And the other thing I'd say, be prepared to spend some money. I've been quite lucky with my covers, actually. I get them for a very reasonable price. But you do have to do all that work. You know, you are a publishing business, really. So you, as well as writing the book, you have to get the cover designed. You have to, do the social media and marketing plan and all that stuff. But that can be fun, doing the covers, but it's also work. Like I've spent hours trawling through to find the right images. So
your covers are beautiful though, and you've done an amazing job of making sure that they all look.
Well, I can thank the designer for that, but you've got to give a good brief. You know, they'll give you a sheet and you do the brief. But I had a pretty clear idea in my head from the start how I wanted the first one to look. And I actually found an image that I really liked. And then quite a well-known author put out, who's quite prolific and is a bit of a mix. She's done trad and indie. She just put up, this is going to be my new cover. What, same body image? Yes.
God, you saw that though.
I did. And
if you hadn't seen it, imagine.
And then, like, I probably would have ended up, because often they end up looking quite different. But then I thought, have to get another girl. And then I found my girl. Yeah. And I thought, and there were bits that had to be changed. There always are. So you have to have a little bit of an imagination, you know, because, you know, I changed eye colour, got rid of some eye bags, changed the clothing. You know, cover designer can do all that.
You've got to outsource your covers, people. Like, I think you can tell a mile away if someone's just whipped one up on Canva themselves.
Yeah, and the branding and, like, the font. I think the font is a dead giveaway. Because often people have a really great image, but the font will be not great.
Comic Sans, no. But you know, might as well be.
It's just, you can just tell. So that is the one. You absolutely get a good cover designer. And you can get one reasonably priced. You don't have to pay $2,000. You can get it for more than that. And don't buy the off-the-shelf ones.
No.
They never look good.
No, they never look good. And also there's, you know, you want, like for you, for example, you got your girl, but then you wanted to put her against a London backdrop.
Yes.
So that was really important because it's part of the story. So you do want to look at the cover and see that represents the book.
And watch out for things where they do specials, like Deposit Photos does a special every year where you can get it really cheaply discounted, and a lot of courses. There's different writing gurus. Dave Chesson runs Kindlepreneur. He's really good. But at Black Friday, you often get really good deals on photo sites, and make sure you pay correctly so that you can use.
Because they have different licenses for either web use or print use or what have you.
And just the volume. So, you know, I'm thinking, I'm not going to be doing, you know, like a traditional publisher, they've got to pay a lot more.
Yeah.
And also there's quite a lot of images that are in Commons too, like my background images. I think that was just on Wiki Commons.
Okay. So you can find some good free images, but maybe for your main image.
Yeah.
That was for the background. But for your main image, probably don't go to Unsplash and Pexels and all the other places where people get free images, because you're going to find it on somebody else's book. You're much better off paying.
Yeah, and you often have to trawl and search. Like I think I put a woman with cape
and red hair.
They don't distinguish between eras, so I put medieval woman, then you get so capes, I think my latest one actually was a princess. It was kind of a fantasy princess series, so the cover designer just took off the crown, and you'll never get the same model exactly. Sometimes you do, but then I've gone, well, they look similar enough.
They do look similar enough. Now, speaking of the third book, The first 2 books are already out. The third book is about to come out.
10th of September.
10th of September.
So pre-order. You can actually order the print book.
Pre-order. So the best place for everybody to find you is at terrigreenauthor.com.
Yep. But if you put in terrigreen.com.au,
we'll find Terri.
Yeah. If you just put Terri Green Author, it'll come up.
Yeah. And I'll pop a link to that in the show notes because that's the best place to buy your books. But it will be, they're all on Amazon.
All on Amazon, Kobo, Apple.
So jump into the show notes and click on those. But I would say get in and read 1 and 2 before the 10th of September. So then you can roll straight into number 3. A wonderful, wonderful book. I love it.
Yes.
I love them all.
Yeah.
Terri, thank you so much for your time today.
It's been lovely chatting. Hopefully that might have been useful to people.
It's very useful to people. I think we've covered quite a few things that I haven't actually spoken to anyone about on the podcast before. So, and I'm all about that. I just want to bring the people, new things, and cater to every writer. And I think we've talked, about a few different things there, and especially in terms of indie publishing. So thank you for your worldly wisdom on all of that. And I will see you probably next week at Writers Group.
Yes, if not, Northern Beaches Writers Festival. We'll give that a little
Northern
plug.
Beaches Readers.
Readers Festival.
Yes.
Oops, slip of the tongue.
Northern Beaches Readers Festival, at which there are also writers.
So not just people sitting around reading books.
I love that they called it Northern Beaches Readers Festival, though, because it is for the readers as well as for the writers.
Yes.
And most festivals, let's face it, are for readers as well. So we're going to be there. Can't wait for that.
It's all about the popular fiction.
Yes. Genre fiction, literary fiction. I'm hosting a session called Messed Up Millennials with Amy Lovett, Jessie Stevens and Madeline Gray, which I'm really looking forward to. Lovely to talk to you, and I look forward to seeing you very soon, and good luck with the release of The King's Jewels. Can't wait.
Thank you very much. Yes, and there is a slight pun on jewels.
Just leaving that right there. That was the fabulous Terri Green. As I said in the intro, I've popped all those resources Terri mentioned into the show notes, which you can find right here in whichever podcast app you're listening to, or on the website at writersbookclubpodcast.com. I really recommend that you check those out. And don't forget to grab copies of the 3 books in Terri's series. You won't be disappointed, I promise. They are a fabulous read. Okay, so who's coming up on the podcast? Well, I'm excited to bring you award-winning playwright, short film writer, radio dramatist and novelist Donna M. Cameron talking about her ecological thriller, The Rewilding. You might have seen this novel around the traps and on social media. It has the most glorious cover. And it's a cracker of a novel. And my goodness, you should read the reviews for this book. Like this one from Cheryl Arkle in The Australian. She said, "This punchy novel hits the ground running, then barrels forward with an urgent momentum that never lets up. Cameron's efficient present tense prose delivers a unique blend of fast-paced action and crystalline observation, with each sentence a perfectly crafted and frequently startling image." How good's that? Now, the manuscript for this novel won Donna a KSP fellowship, was runner-up in a Writing New South Wales award, and gained her a Varuna fellowship as well. So I'm really looking forward to talking to her about fellowships and awards and get some insights into that process for you guys. And of course, I'd love to talk to her about her work as a radio dramatist and a playwright and a short film writer, and see what she brings from all of that into her novel writing. Okay, let me tell you what The Rewilding is about. Heartbroken and in fear for his life, corporate whistleblower Jagger Eckerman escapes to hide out in a remote cave, but kick-ass radical Nia Moretti is furious that a capitalist suit has taken over her cave. It's hatred at first sight. Yet Nia is hiding for reasons of her own, ones that drag Jagger closer to death as they are forced on the run together, and he's unwittingly pulled deeper into Nia's reckless mission to help save the planet. But who can save Jagger from the relentless pursuit of the man who wants him dead? Both an electrifying cat and mouse chase and an odd couple love story, The Rewilding captures the essence of what it means to be alive today in this cusp of change pulsing with possibilities. And I am in the final few pages of reading this book, and I can tell you it's brilliant. Now, of course, I'm giving away a copy of The Rewilding. All the details for that giveaway are over on Instagram and Facebook. So jump over there if you would like to enter and try and win a copy. Okay, lovely listeners, that's it for this month. As always, I'm recording on the beautiful unceded lands of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, where I'm lucky enough to live and work. I will catch you next month. Until then, happy writing.